There is a quiet, unspoken anxiety that haunts the modern American professional landscape. We are raised on a steady diet of meritocracy, conditioned to believe that if we work hard, keep our heads down, and treat others with absolute transparency, the system will naturally reward us. But as you navigate the high-stakes environments of modern corporate culture, from the hyper-competitive tech hubs of Silicon Valley to the ruthless financial corridors of Wall Street, you eventually hit a wall of cold reality. You notice that the individuals moving up the ladder are not necessarily the most technically proficient or the most inherently virtuous. Instead, they are the ones who intuitively understand the invisible undercurrents of human psychology and power dynamics. This is where the profound realization sets in that playing nice is often a luxury, while understanding dark psychology is an act of mandatory self-preservation. When we look at the fabric of competitive society through an analytical lens, we realize that the ancient strategies outlined centuries ago are not outdated relics of history. They are active blueprints for survival. At Lucid Soma, we do not view these principles as tools for malicious manipulation, but rather as an essential cognitive shield. To protect your career, your mental sanity, and your personal autonomy in a world that constantly demands your submission, you must learn to read the chessboard. You must understand the mind of the architect who designed the game, and no one understood the raw, unvarnished mechanics of human nature better than the Italian diplomat and philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli. His insights were never meant to comfort us, they were meant to wake us up to the strategic realities of the world as it actually is, rather than how we wish it would be. To build an unshakable defense mechanism, we must begin with the first fundamental principle of strategic psychological insulation, which dictates that you must never let your true intentions be transparent. In the modern workspace, there is a dangerous push toward absolute vulnerability and radical transparency. We are encouraged to share our long-term goals, our personal ambitions, and our immediate strategies with our peers and superiors. However, from a Machiavellian perspective, absolute transparency is equivalent to tactical nakedness. When you make your ultimate destination obvious to everyone around you, you inadvertently surrender your greatest asset, which is information asymmetry. Human beings are inherently loss-averse and competitive creatures. The moment a colleague or a manager knows exactly what you want, whether it is a specific promotion, a high-profile project, or a transition to a different department, they gain the ability to predict your behavior. They can anticipate your moves, intercept your resources, and subtly adjust their own positioning to ensure that your path is obstructed. Behavioral psychology shows us that when intentions are clear, it triggers a counter-response in others, often driven by the fear of being surpassed. To protect yourself, you must master the art of the smoke screen. This does not mean actively lying or engaging in malicious deception, rather, it means cultivating a state of strategic ambiguity. When you speak about your project or your future plans, keep the conversation focused on the immediate task at hand or discuss multiple, divergent paths with equal enthusiasm. By scattering the focus of those around you, you prevent them from consolidating their efforts to undermine you. In a fast-paced American corporate restructuring environment, the professional who quietly executes their strategy while keeping their final target completely invisible is the one who remains untouchable when the dust settles. You must allow your results to speak for themselves, ensuring that by the time anyone realizes what your true objective was, you have already secured the high ground. Building directly upon the necessity of strategic ambiguity, the second rule shifts our focus toward the fragile nature of interpersonal trust within competitive systems. It states that you must trust but verify, and ultimately depend on necessity rather than loyalty. One of the most painful psychological realizations an ambitious individual faces is discovering that professional loyalty is largely a transactional illusion. In moments of stability, alliances feel genuine, and promises of mutual support flow easily. However, when the economic climate shifts, when corporate layoffs loom, or when a scarce resource is suddenly up for grabs, the evolutionary drive for self-preservation overrides any emotional bond. Machiavelli famously observed that men are quicker to forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony, pointing out that human relationships are fundamentally tethered to self-interest. When you base your personal security on the assumption that someone will protect you simply because you have been loyal to them, you build your foundation on sand. To insulate yourself from betrayal, you must change the currency of your relationships from emotional loyalty to structural necessity. You must ask yourself a cold, analytical question: why do the people around me need me? True security does not come from being liked, it comes from being indispensable. When your skill set, your institutional knowledge, or your unique execution capabilities are so deeply integrated into a project that your absence would cause immediate operational failure, you have established a position of necessity. People will treat you with respect, honor their agreements, and protect your interests not because they possess a high moral character, but because their own survival depends entirely on your continued cooperation. At Lucid Soma, we analyze this not as a cynical rejection of human connection, but as a realistic assessment of institutional behavior. By ensuring that your value is structurally hardwired into the environment, you create a natural deterrent against political sabotage and corporate exploitation. Once you understand how to navigate intentions and establish your necessity, you must master the mechanics of your own presence, which brings us to the third critical rule, the calculated use of absence to control your perceived value. In a highly digitalized society where we are constantly connected, there is a psychological trap of overexposure. The modern corporate ethic often demands that you be available 24 hours a day, responding to emails instantly, attending every non-essential meeting, and constantly reminding everyone of your presence. While this might feel like you are demonstrating dedication, psychology reveals a counterintuitive truth: familiarity breeds contempt, and constant availability drastically depreciates your market value. The economic principle of scarcity applies directly to human dynamics. When something is abundant and easily accessible, its perceived value drops to zero. If you are always available to fix every problem, clean up every operational mess, and answer every minor query, you cease to be viewed as an elite strategist. Instead, you are categorized as a baseline commodity, a reliable utility that can be taken for granted. To reverse this dynamic and protect your professional status, you must introduce the strategy of calculated absence. You must become highly selective with your time, your attention, and your physical presence. When you withdraw your availability slightly, it triggers the cognitive bias of loss aversion in the minds of your peers and managers. Suddenly, your input is no longer a given, it becomes a sought-after resource. When you speak less frequently, the words you do choose to deliver carry significantly more weight. When you are not present in every single casual conversation, your appearance in high-level discussions commands an entirely different level of authority. By managing the supply of your presence, you systematically dictate the demand for your expertise. This strategic withdrawal creates a psychological vacuum that forces others to recognize the gap you leave behind, ensuring that your contributions are not just noticed, but deeply valued and fiercely protected. The strategic curation of your presence naturally leads to the creation of your most critical asset in any competitive hierarchy, which brings us to the fourth rule of Machiavellian self-defense, the absolute weaponization of your public reputation. In the modern American landscape, where digital footprints, professional branding, and corporate optics dictate your upward mobility, you do not exist merely as a biological entity. You exist as a perception in the minds of others. Long before you enter a boardroom, pitch a project, or sit down for a performance review, your reputation has already arrived, creating a cognitive framework through which every single one of your actions will be judged. If your reputation is vague, fragile, or left to chance, you leave yourself completely vulnerable to the projections, biases, and malicious framing of your competitors. Behavioral psychology outlines a phenomenon known as the halo effect, where a single positive trait or well-established reputation creates an umbrella of trust that colors every subsequent interaction. Machiavelli understood this fundamental quirk of human nature deeply, stating that vulgar minds are always taken by appearances and by the event of things. The world does not have the time or the emotional bandwidth to discover your true, complex inner self. They will judge you based on the external archetype you present. To protect yourself, you must treat your reputation not as an accidental byproduct of your work, but as a heavily fortified wall. You must consciously decide what your core professional anchor will be, whether it is unshakable operational reliability, cold analytical brilliance, or absolute discretion. Once this anchor is cast, you must defend it with ruthless consistency. When someone attempts to undermine you, they will first target your reputation, attempting to introduce doubt or characterize you as erratic, unreliable, or overly emotional. If your reputation is solid, these attacks will simply bounce off, viewed by the collective environment as mere envy or baseless noise. By taking active control of the narrative surrounding your professional identity, you establish a psychological gravity that forces others to treat you with deference, transforming your public perception into an automated shield that works for you even when you are not in the room. Once you understand that perception is the battlefield, you must learn how to navigate conflicts within that space without destroying your strategic positioning, which introduces our fifth principle: the necessity of winning through tangible outcomes rather than intellectual arguments. In the modern American workspace, we are conditioned to believe that the best idea always wins through open debate. We sit in endless meetings, engaging in passionate arguments, believing that if we can just prove our logical superiority, our peers and managers will naturally concede and align with our vision. However, from a psychological perspective, direct verbal arguments are almost entirely counterproductive. When you engage in a public intellectual battle with a colleague, you are not just debating a business strategy, you are actively threatening their ego, their status, and their sense of intellectual competence. Cognitive dissonance theory demonstrates that when a person's deeply held beliefs or professional pride are challenged, their brain enters a defensive state, actively rejecting logic in order to protect their self-esteem. Even if you win the argument factually and force them into silence through sheer intellectual dominance, you have achieved a catastrophic strategic failure. You have humiliated them publicly, creating a deeply resentful adversary who will quietly look for every opportunity to sabotage your future initiatives. Machiavelli warned that victories achieved through verbal coercion are hollow, temporary, and laced with long-term danger. To protect yourself from this invisible blowback, you must substitute verbal combat with undeniable metrics, data, and execution. Do not waste your psychological energy trying to convince a skeptical manager or a resistant peer through long-winded debates. Instead, nod, acknowledge their perspective, and quietly build a pilot program, gather empirical data, or secure a small, undeniable victory that proves your point without firing a single verbal shot. When the metrics are displayed on a screen, showing an indisputable increase in revenue, efficiency, or user engagement, the argument is over. Your opponents are forced to accept your conclusion not because you defeated them in a shouting match, but because reality itself has validated your position. This allows you to achieve your objectives while keeping your professional relationships clean, leaving your competitors with nothing to attack except the empirical truth. This mastery of interpersonal friction becomes even more critical when we look upward at the structural hierarchy, revealing the sixth rule of survival, the sophisticated management of vertical power dynamics, or what is classically known as never outshining the master. In the contemporary corporate ecosystems of the West, organizations love to promote the illusion of a flat hierarchy. Tech startups and modern creative agencies boast about open-door policies, casual dress codes, and the idea that everyone is an equal contributor. But you must never mistake a casual environment for an absence of power dynamics. The psychological reality of leadership is that those who hold authority, whether they are executive directors, vice presidents, or startup founders, possess a deeply ingrained need for security, validation, and control. They have climbed the ladder through immense effort, and their greatest subconscious fear is being replaced, eclipsed, or made to look obsolete by a brilliant, ambitious subordinate. When you enter an organization with overflowing energy, constantly pitching revolutionary ideas that expose the inefficiencies of the current leadership, you believe you are demonstrating high value. In reality, you are triggering a profound existential threat in the mind of your superior. They will not see you as an asset, they will see you as a predator waiting for the right moment to take their place. As a result, they will subtly begin to exclude you from high-level communications, starve your projects of resources, and minimize your contributions to ensure their own survival. To protect your career from this invisible ceiling, you must learn to frame your brilliance as a reflection of their leadership. Your ideas should never be presented as a radical departure from their vision, but rather as the natural, logical evolution of the groundwork they have already laid. When you achieve a massive operational victory, ensure that public credit is shared generously upward, making it clear that your execution was made possible only by their strategic guidance. By making your superiors feel intellectually secure and visionary, you transform them from potential roadblocks into powerful accelerators, ensuring that as they continue to rise within the organization, they will naturally pull you up with them to maintain their own success. To effectively manage these complex dynamics across all levels of an organization, you require an unshakable foundation of intelligence, which brings us to the seventh rule, the practice of strategic receptivity, or posing as an echo while operating as an information collector. Information is the ultimate currency of self-defense in a highly competitive society. To protect yourself from shifting political winds, corporate restructurings, or sudden betrayals, you must know what is happening behind closed doors long before the official announcements are made. However, you cannot gather this intelligence by being loud, aggressive, or overly inquisitive, as this immediately puts people on the defensive, causing them to close ranks and hide their true motives. Instead, you must master the psychological art of active, non-reactive listening. The vast majority of people possess an intense, almost uncontrollable desire to talk about themselves, their frustrations, their alliances, and their secret ambitions. When they encounter an individual who is quiet, empathetic, and highly receptive, their natural psychological guard drops completely. By adopting a posture of calm neutrality, avoiding gossip, and offering a safe, non-judgmental space for others to express their thoughts, you become an ideological mirror. People will naturally begin to confide in you, revealing the hidden fractures within the team, the true motivations behind managerial decisions, and the subtle shifts in organizational alliances. While they believe they are simply venting to a supportive colleague, you are systematically mapping the entire political terrain. You learn who holds the real power, who is losing influence, and where the next major conflict will erupt. This deep, verified insight allows you to make highly calculated strategic adjustments in complete silence. You can reposition your projects, distance yourself from failing initiatives, and align your efforts with emerging power centers long before the rest of the room even realizes the game has changed. you remain entirely protected because while you know everything about everyone else, your own psychological perimeter remains completely opaque, ensuring that you are never caught off guard by the unpredictable currents of human nature. This mastery of internal information maps out the final territory of self-preservation, leading us directly into the 8th rule of Machiavellian defense, which is the absolute necessity of insulating your perimeter from collective failure and protecting your name from operational fallout. In the highly pressurized environments of modern American business, failure is not merely treated as a learning experience, it is frequently treated as a political death sentence. When a major corporate initiative collapses, when a marketing campaign plummets in ROI, or when a tech product launches with catastrophic bugs, the immediate institutional response is not objective analysis. It is a desperate, chaotic hunt for a scapegoat. The hierarchy instinctively seeks a single individual or a specific department to bear the entire weight of the disaster, allowing the senior leadership to maintain their clean record and preserve their status. If you are the person who is overly exposed, holding absolute unaccountable responsibility for a risky project without any strategic buffer, you are volunteering to be that sacrifice. Machiavelli observed that successful leaders always ensure that unpopular actions or high-risk execution tasks are delegated through intermediaries, allowing them to remain associated only with victories and positive outcomes. To protect yourself in a ruthless corporate meritocracy, you must master the architecture of shared accountability. This does not mean dodging your actual work or acting with unprofessional cowardice. Rather, it means establishing clear, documented boundaries of risk before a project even begins. You must ensure that high-stakes decisions are validated by cross-functional committees, signed off by multiple stakeholders, and backed by collective consensus. When the operational weight is distributed across the infrastructure, it becomes structurally impossible for a single political adversary to frame the failure as your exclusive fault. By maintaining this professional insulation, you ensure that even when the storms of organizational failure hit, your career remains structurally protected, allowing you to survive the fallout and pivot to the next opportunity with your reputation completely intact. As you fortify your defense against systemic failure, you must also refine the way you guide the decisions of those around you, bringing us to the 9th rule, the sophisticated deployment of choice architecture, or controlling the options while allowing others to feel completely autonomous. One of the quickest ways to trigger a psychological revolt in a competitive society is to dictate terms aggressively. When you tell a client, a colleague, or a subordinate exactly what they must do, you immediately activate their psychological reactance, which is the intense emotional urge to resist a perceived threat to their personal freedom. Even if your direction is logically flawless and entirely beneficial to the project, human beings will often choose a suboptimal path simply to prove that they are in control of their own actions. To protect your strategic interests from this irrational resistance, you must stop issuing rigid demands and start designing the environment in which choices are made. Behavioral economics refers to this as choice architecture, a method where you present a curated spectrum of options to the other party, ensuring that every single selectable outcome inherently satisfies your baseline strategic goals. Machiavelli noted that when individuals believe they are acting on their own free will, they accept the consequences of their actions with far less resentment and feel a greater sense of ownership over the path forward. In a practical scenario, if you need a specific corporate policy adopted or a particular creative direction chosen, you do not argue for it exclusively. Instead, you present 3 distinct strategies. The first option is slightly underdeveloped, the second option is overly chaotic, and the third option is the precisely engineered, highly logical strategy you intended to execute all along. When your stakeholders look at the options, they will naturally select the third path, believing they have made a brilliant, independent decision based on their own analytical prowess. you achieve your exact objective, your boundaries are protected, and the people around you remain highly cooperative because their sense of personal autonomy and professional ego has been left completely unblemished. This structural control over your environment culminates in the 10th and most powerful rule of dark psychology for self-defense, which is the cultivation of absolute emotional detachment and treating human behavior as raw data rather than a personal affront. The single greatest vulnerability any ambitious individual possesses is not a lack of technical skill, nor is it a lack of intelligence. It is emotional reactivity. In the hyper-competitive arenas of modern society, your adversaries and competitors will constantly look for your emotional triggers. They will use subtle passive-aggressive remarks, calculated exclusions, unfair criticisms, or unexpected provocations to make you lose your composure. The moment you react with anger, defensiveness, or visible anxiety, you have effectively surrendered control of your psychological perimeter. You become entirely predictable, allowing others to manipulate your actions through your emotions, and you often make strategic blunders that damage your long-term reputation. Machiavelli operated with a mind of pure cold realism, viewing the betrayals, alliances, and shifting loyalties of his era not through a lens of moral outrage, but as predictable, natural laws of human behavior. To achieve absolute self-protection, you must adopt this exact analytical mindset. When a colleague takes credit for your idea, or a manager breaks a promise, you must refuse to take it personally. Taking it personally implies that you expected the world to be fair, which is a dangerous form of naive idealism. Instead, you must view these actions as a scientist views a chemical reaction. Treat the behavior of those around you as raw data points, indicators of their current incentives, fears, and strategic positions. When you remove emotional static from your cognitive processor, your mind becomes incredibly sharp. You no longer waste energy on resentment or anger. Instead, you immediately begin calculating the most efficient, rational counter-move. You insulate your inner peace from the external chaos, ensuring that while everyone else is reacting emotionally to the shifting tides, you remain the calm, calculating center of the storm, entirely untouchable and always 3 moves ahead. When we synthesize these 10 profound principles, a significant paradigm shift occurs within our understanding of strategic survival. The world often presents us with a false dichotomy, forcing us to believe that we must either choose to be a naive, submissive player who is constantly exploited by the system, or a malicious, predatory manipulator who destroys everyone in their path. But through the analytical lens we cultivate here at Lucid Soma, we recognize that there is a third, far more sophisticated path. Understanding the mechanics of dark psychology and the timeless strategies of Machiavelli is not about becoming the predator. It is about becoming entirely un-preyable. It is about looking at the architecture of human power with absolute clarity, acknowledging the competitive, flawed nature of human institutions, and constructing a cognitive shield that preserves your autonomy, your career, and your dignity. When you master the art of strategic ambiguity, when you anchor your relationships in necessity rather than fragile loyalty, and when you insulate your mind through emotional detachment, you are no longer a passive participant in the game. You become an advanced strategist who respects the reality of the world while navigating it on your own terms. You do not lose your humanity, rather, you protect it by ensuring that your kindness is never mistaken for weakness, and your transparency is never used as a weapon against you. If this deep analytical journey has provided you with a clearer, sharper perspective on the invisible forces shaping your professional and social world, we invite you to join our collective mind here at Lucid Soma. Navigating a highly competitive society requires constant strategic recalibration, and our goal is to continue decoding these hidden psychological mechanics together. If you found value in this analysis, consider subscribing to the channel, sharing this essay with those who value deep strategy, and leaving a thought-provoking comment below with your insights on how you protect your own boundaries in a ruthless world. Thank you for investing your time and intellect with us. Stay observant, stay strategic, and remember to always read the chessboard. This is Lucid Soma, and we will see you in the next analysis.